I would like to bring Dr. Eeson and also Suet up. So let me just add spotlight. All right. So before we start, just a very short introduction for Dr. Eeson. I think a lot of you are no stranger. I mean, Dr. Eeson is no stranger to many of you. He's a very popular doctor. So Dr. Eeson is currently a director of Sunfert International, and he is also well known amongst his patients for his friendly demeanor and always reminds himself that a good doctor should always take a pragmatic approach. And aside from that, Dr. Eeson has also authored the highly informative book entitled Overcoming Fertility, published by MPH, which has also been translated into Mandarin and also Bahasa Indonesia. So if you're interested to know more about this subject, you can grab a copy at your nearest MPH bookstore. As for Suet and Karthik, they are personally my friends as well. And previously, whenever I think about doing a session on infertility or PCOS or IVF, I will always think about Suet because she is really inspiring for openly sharing her story on her social media. And, you know, we all know that this topic is very delicate and not everyone is comfortable to share so openly, you know, on the ups and downs, the struggles, but she shared it. And because of that, a lot of people are very blessed and very encouraged throughout their journey as well. So we are very honored to have both Dr. Eeson and also Suet and Karthik here. So welcome everyone. Okay, so without further ado, I will just give a brief agenda introduction for tonight. It's going to be very free flow. We are going to be answering your questions that we collected when you RSVP'd through the Google form. But if, let's say, throughout the whole session, you still have questions that you want to ask, feel free to just leave it in the comment box and we will get to your question if it's not answered yet, all right? So we'll start off with infertility related questions. And after that, we're going to talk about IVF related questions. Okay. So the first question is towards doctor. So what does infertility really mean?
Okay.
So, Dr. Eeson.
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you for the kind invitation. Thanks, really nice, and Karthik. Nice seeing you guys. You know, COVID has changed a lot of things. You know, we don't get to meet people face to face anymore, you know. So in a big way, it's changed a lot of things in a big way. Okay, how would we define infertility? So basically, infertility is the inability to conceive after having tried for a year. Okay, but there's also an age distinction. So they say that if you've been trying for a year and you are 35 years and younger, then that qualifies as having an issue. If on the other hand, you are above the age of 35, then perhaps trying for 6 months, and that would be the definition of infertility. I think there are two issues. One is the pragmatic approach, as I always allude to, you know. I think that following a textbook definition may not be in the best interest of everybody. Okay, so I think that when you think that there is an issue, you know, it's probably worth you know, coming forward just for an assessment. It doesn't mean anything at all. Okay, an assessment does not mean anything at all. And if everything is found to be fine, then, you know, walk away and try. You know, and sometimes, you know, it can be very simple. The problem can be actually very simple and very easy to resolve, and all they required was just a pointer. You know. And I'll probably give an example of that as we move forward. So that's don't feel that, you know, if you come forward you'll be caught. You know, like I always give the example of a spider web. You know, where you know, it's a fly that just happened to go and get caught in a spider web and then, you know, get gobbled up. So someone going to a fertility clinic for an assessment and, you know, never come out the same again. You know, that's not true, that's not true. I think you know, you have to just go for an assessment, and if everything is fine, just walk away, you know, and try. And the second thing I think is important is an example that I often give people. You know? Somebody does IVF and conceives, and perhaps conceives, you know, 1, 2, 3, you know, as many as you want. And fast forward 20 years. Okay, fast forward 20 years, she turns around and she asks, does that mean I could not conceive on my own? Okay, does that mean I could not conceive on my own? And my standard answer, which I believe to be true, is that's not true. Okay, it does not mean that you could not conceive on your own. All it says is that at that point in time, we had not conceived yet, and therefore chose to move on. Okay, because you cannot turn back time. Okay, so at some point you have to say, listen here, I mean, there's nothing to say that it would not have happened on its own moving forward. It's entirely possible. Who is that? Who are we to have determined that, oh, this is never going to happen? Okay, it may have happened, on its own moving forward. The only problem is we don't know that because we can't read the future. So at some given point in time, we have made that conscious decision that I'm done waiting for now. I got other things to do which are more important, like moving on with life, career, so on and so forth. And just get on, So it just means that at that point in time, I have made that decision to move on. It doesn't mean that, it's never going to happen. Okay, that's all. Because time is just so important.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Eeson. And another question relating to infertility. Does low BMI affect infertility?
Well, okay, so low BMI, an exceptionally low BMI, perhaps less than 16, may affect fertility. But you know what? The real problem in 2022 is not a low BMI, it's a high BMI. Okay, I think that the ratio of patients with a high BMI having the ratio of patients having BMI related issues, high BMI versus low BMI, I think it's 100 to 1. In other words, you see 100 patients with a high BMI and having fertility issues in comparison to one patient having a low BMI, having fertility issues.
I think it's also because most people have high BMI compared to low BMI
exactly,
as well these days.
And that is, I always believe it's easier to fatten you up than to shrink you down.
That's very true.
But yeah, so high BMI is more often an issue. And generally, if you think that the BMI is low, as long as the cycles are still regular, then it shouldn't be an issue. But if the BMI is low, but the cycles have become irregular, then perhaps that's telling of an issue. The definition of regularity is very simple. Cycles that come on the expected date plus minus 2 days. So if you get somebody who comes by and he says, oh, my cycles are regular, what do you mean by regular? I get it every month. That's their definition of regularity, then that's not true. Okay, because it has to be coming at the anticipated date, but plus minus 2 days.
Okay, which leads me to the next question actually, like how to track ovulation effectively if I have irregular period cycles. Because like for myself, all this while since I was young, I've always had like plus minus 5 days, 7 days. To me, as long as it's within like 7 days, I thought it was regular. So I've always told people, I have regular period, But now that I know it's plus minus 2 days, then I know I have always been having irregular period. But even then, when I was trying to conceive, I really bought a lot of like ovulation kits, more than test kits every month, whatever people say, oh, expensive, very good, I'll buy. And but I always struggled with that because I felt like it's so hard to track when I'm going to be ovulating, right? Because I have irregular periods. So how do we track, or how do we, measure when we should?
So this is really very interesting because ovulation issues with ovulation is a very important cause of a delay in conceiving. Okay, now the simple rule of thumb: regular cycles equals to ovulation, irregular cycles equals to non-ovulation. Okay, so regular cycles equals to ovulation, irregular cycles equals to non-ovulation, and this is true 95% of the time. Okay. Now, definition of regularity, as I mentioned, is it comes at the expected date plus minus 2 days. Okay. Now, cycle length will differ from person to person. So some people may have shorter cycles, some people may have a longer cycle. Anything between 21 days to 35 days is considered within the normal range. Okay. So what it means is not one person having cycles between 21 to 35 days, but different people having cycle lengths of that range. So you may have somebody out there with a 35-day cycle, and that's fine. Somebody out there with a 31-day cycle, and that's fine. And you may even have somebody out there with a 21-day cycle, and that's fine. But once it leaves the 21 to 35 range, then perhaps we may have an issue. Okay. Then the remember that ovulation always happens 14 days before the onset of the next cycle. Okay, 14 days before the onset of the next cycle. So for example, if you have a 35-day cycle, then you would expect that ovulation will happen on day 21. If you have a textbook 28-day cycle, and very few people do, then ovulation is expected around the day on day 14. Okay, if you have a 21-day cycle, then you would expect ovulation to happen on day 7. Okay, so it's always 14 days before the next cycle. And why 14 days? Because after the egg has been released, the eggshell or the follicle that's now empty because the egg has left it, now is called a corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum has a 14-day lifespan. Okay, after 14 days, it is automatically programmed to crumple, and therefore the progesterone levels will fall. It's an auto timer. Okay, it is an auto timer, and that is what gives you the regularity of the cycle. The auto timer in the corpus luteum, 14 days, and that applies to most humans. Okay.
Okay.
And of course, the last ruling is that it's not an all or none law. It's not that somebody will either always be ovulating or always not be ovulating. No. You can have some cycles in which you're ovulating, and you can have some cycles in which you're not ovulating. Okay. So if you track your cycles for the whole year, you may find that maybe in a year, 3 cycles sound like they're ovulatory, and the rest sound like they're non-ovulatory. So what it really means is, in that whole year, they only had 3 chances to conceive. Okay, whereas all the rest of the year, there was no chance because it was very likely that she was not ovulating. So it's important to be able to eyeball this whole thing by looking at the at how the cycles are using these simple rules. Okay, so if you ask somebody whether your cycles are regular, and then then the answer is yes or no, and then you ask a little bit more, what do you mean by regular? And she says, what kind of cycle length are we talking about? And she says, my shorter cycle is 25 days, and my longer cycle can be 35 days. That already sounds very suspicious, right?
Yes.
Because 25
I think that was me.
is quite it's quite far apart. Okay, it already sounds very suspicious that maybe, hey, a couple of cycles are probably non-ovulatory. Then you go a bit deeper, you dig a bit deeper to try and find out what is really going on. The best, of course, are those who keep track on the first day of the last period in all the apps, the usual apps that exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, and of course, the final thing is, so just by knowing your cycle length, you can define whether it's regular or not, and roughly you can tell how many cycles in a year are ovulatory and how many are not. So finally, the last question is, how do you then pinpoint ovulation? Okay, how do you pinpoint ovulation? So there are many methods out there, but realistically, pragmatically, and from a very scientific point of view, the only one that's really worth talking about is the ovulation test kit. The worst possible one of all is the body temperature rise. Oh, that is by far the most horrifying of all, because for 2 reasons. Number one is difficult to do. Okay.
Yes.
And then you're looking for that 0.5 degrees Celsius rise. Okay. And then you plot it, and then you come and show a graph that looks at the KLSC stock market, the way it's the volatility of the KL stock market. Okay. And then finally, no conclusion. Okay. The worst thing of all is, why do you actually get a rise in basal body temperature? It's because of the effect of progesterone. So after the egg has been released from the follicle, as I mentioned, the follicle then becomes a corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum releases hormone progesterone. Okay, and this hormone progesterone has the ability to raise your temperature by 0.5 degrees Celsius.
Which is really little, actually, right? I mean, you walk out of the door, you already have like 2 degrees.
Precisely. I mean, I think the COVID-19, temperature scanner told us that, a long time, 2 years ago, right? You can walk down the street and get a fever, isn't it? So the temperature rise is because of the progesterone that's coming out from the corpus luteum, and that is why we're looking for a rise in the basal body temperature. Mm-hmm. So what are we actually saying? We are looking for a temperature rise because of progesterone that's coming from the corpus luteum after ovulation. So basically, when the time you find that rise in the temperature, that egg is
It's
long
over.
gone.
Yeah. And then you start trying and it's not
Exactly.
working.
So it's
Yeah.
pointless, right? Okay.
So
you're
the most
putting-
accurate will be ovulation test kit.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I have a question here as well, like a direct message to me.
It also depends where you buy your test kit from.
Do you have
If
any
you're one of those,
recommendations?
if you're one of those who are buying it, 1,000 sticks on the internet for 100 ringgit. That one, I think even mine is so positive lah. Hey, Karthik is so positive.
Everyone is ovulating, huh?
And then you'll get the ones with the chatting, they'll come with the whole month, day 1 to day 30 with all the kids all stuck there, wow, you do so many, very cheap, very cheap, very cheap.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so this Jane, right, is asking me why does my period come 3 weeks post ovulation, tracked by ovulation kit for the past 1 year? My period always comes in 2 weeks post ovulation.
Sorry, yeah, tracked for the past 1 year.
Yeah, because for the past 1 year, her period always comes 2 weeks after ovulation. So she's curious why her ovulation is 3 weeks post. Why my period came 3 weeks post ovulation, tracked by ovulation kit.
The period came 3 weeks post ovulation.
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, we need to find out. Okay, so this is how we dig a bit into it. Okay, so this sounds a bit interesting, right? Why is it that it's coming 3 weeks after post ovulation? Okay. So how I would look at it is, first of all, I want to know about cycle length. Okay. Does she have normal regular cycles based on our definition of regularity being coming within plus minus 2 days? Okay. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Now, if that is if it's true that she's having regular cycles that come plus minus 2 days, then how are we monitoring ovulation? We are using the test kit. Fair enough. Okay, we use the test kit. Do you get a negative, positive, negative, or is it one of those things where you get positive for many days? Because what I'm really coming to is because there are people out there who may get a positive ovulation test which is not very reliable. Okay, and this is especially for patients with PCO. Okay, patients with PCO are especially prone to getting a false positive on an ovulation. I mean, we all know this ovulation test kit is horrendously, prone to false positives.
And there's no way to know as well, like for us, right?
Absolutely. And why do PCO patients get a false positive? Because remember, one of the hormones which is found to be deranged in PCO is an LH, luteinizing hormone. So a textbook description of the hormonal changes in PCO would be a high LH, okay, or high LH ratio in comparison to FSH, okay. So luteinizing hormone ratio is high in relation to the FSH ratio. Don't forget that when you do an ovulation test kit, you are actually testing for LH, the same hormone that is found to be abnormally high in PCO patients. So no surprising that you'll get PCO patients running around with, ovulation positive every day. It's a false positive because LH is, it's memang high lah. It's always high. So be careful.
See. Yeah. So these are some of the factors that we need to actually ask,
yes,
like our period cycle length and also whether we have PCOS.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Eeson. Yeah. Sorry, please continue.
Now, I'm just about to say that finally, if this particular person, if your cycles are truly regular, it comes within your plus minus 2 days, and ovulation test case, it's clearly negative, then positive, and then negative, and it is 3 weeks, then I must admit that it is odd. So the next thing that she should be doing is to get a scan.
Yeah.
Okay, get a scan done at the time of ovulation and determine whether or not there is actually a large follicle.
Yeah, I think that will be the best to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Eeson. I'll come back to you again with more questions.
Sure.
But for now, Suet and Karthik, hello. Feel free to unmute yourself, okay?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi guys.
Okay.
So I have a question for you coming from the audience. How do I overcome the feeling of being a failure, unable to conceive? People are asking me why no baby after so long. So these are questions that I'm sure you have gotten many times, right, before you manage to conceive. And
I have an
personally for myself
objection.
as well.
I have an objection to that statement of failure, because I alluded to that earlier. It is not that it hasn't happened. It's just that at that point in time, we have decided to make a conscious effort to move on, because there's just so many other things going on in life, and becoming bogged down by one thing. Anyway, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. So hi. So for context, actually, Dr. Eeson is our doctor as well. So it's quite nice to see him here without his mask. So I almost forgot how you look like, Dr. Eeson. I can see how you look like. Yeah, and we just saw him like a few weeks ago as well for our second IVF cycle. Okay, so how to answer this question? It's a process, I guess. Like it's been like 4 years for us going through this journey, right? So in the beginning, of course, it felt very raw. Only because it's not really talked about much, right? I think that's also another point, right? It's not talked about much. Like if you have, I guess, other health diseases also, you don't really like shout about it much. Any sort of like disease, you do feel that, okay, your body is not functioning well. So I think it's normal to feel that way, and maybe like not be too occupied with thinking that, it's a bad thing to feel that way. The first year going, to the clinic every week, that felt like a burden for us. And we felt like we didn't, like, how come people don't have to do this? We have to do this. Like you hear people getting pregnant like in their honeymoon, like unexpectedly as well. And you just feel like my body is not functioning the way it should. And it does feel bad. I mean, it did feel bad for a very long time. And I think it's okay to come to terms with that and to also kind of grieve a little bit that it's maybe not as normal as what you think people are going through. But then after that, going through this journey, you realize that actually it's not that abnormal as well. So many people, 1 in 4, or more as well, have these issues. So, and then coming to terms and being aware of it, then realizing that actually it's not that uncommon now. But I think it's normal to feel that way in the beginning. Don't worry that it's not, What do you think?
Yeah, because I think it's very normal for us, especially women, right, to feel like our body is failing us. The one thing that we should do is to, give birth and like get pregnant, but it's not happening and it's so difficult. So yeah, like personally for me, I must say, even though I'm an optimist, I really did feel quite bad as well. And it was something that I had to acknowledge and deal with, because no matter how strong you are, somehow this will get to you at some point, right? Right, Suet and Karthik, right? Like especially when you're trying and you're not being public about it, and then people start asking, why you still don't want to have your second child? If you drag any longer, then your first child is not gonna be welcoming towards the brother or the sister, and then your first child is gonna be very spoiled, and then he's gonna be not gonna know how to share. So those were quite hurtful, because it was not just about myself anymore. This was about like my son
So
was
as if you're
actually
not
being
trying for your child.
yes, as if we are not being considerate parents, to give my son another sibling, right? So it was really, really not nice. But I think the only way is just to really go through the emotions and just acknowledge and just accept that, what, this is part and parcel. And if I want to share with people, why, I will share. If you really don't want to share, then I guess you just have to wait it out, and people will eventually know why it's been taking so long.
And to be honest, that's why I started this IVF account as well. Like this is why it's like people keep asking, and I'm like, okay, you know why? This is why I'm just gonna share publicly, so that then like I think people ask also sometimes because they want to talk about it, but they don't know how to be like easy about it, or they don't know how to the kind of words, they don't know how to be kind about it. So I think people sometimes try to be helpful by trying to offer tips or whatever, but it comes out wrongly. So that's the main reason why I started the account, because I'm like, instead of asking, I'm just going to give you information, overload, if you want to know why it's not happening, why it's not happening. Any from your side, like, do you feel like a failure?
No, I think beyond, like, I wouldn't use the word failure, right? Like for us, it's like over time it becomes even more of a longing and yearning. And that gets to you, I think, like when you see your peers or friends or colleagues having their kid, then you be like, like you want it even more. You love like that feeling of like having a kid. And I think like you mentioned, right, like it can get to a point of from yearning to longing to sort of like a resentment, and that can translate into a failure or a feeling of failure. And I did, even recognize that with a friend of mine who had tried it for way longer than we did. And over time it became like quite difficult for them to be with like a newborn or a kid,
Yeah.
because of that feeling of really wanting so bad and longing for so
Yes.
long.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that we needed to discuss is how long are we going to try, and when are we going to make a decision that after trying we are we no longer going to try. And I think it alludes to the point that Dr. Eeson was sharing, right? Is that at that moment in time we'll make the decision that, okay, we will find a different way of living our life. And at that point, I think when we discussed, it was also around like, because we used to be teachers, and we absolutely love being with kids. So maybe that is the way that we cultivate our love for having kids, is by maybe doing something along those lines. I think we were thinking of those things, just preparing that it's not going to be easy, it's going to be hard, but we are going to be longing, and it's going to get to us. But when it does, after 3 tries, for example, then we need to kind of like shift our approach, like no longer planning to have a kid and like a 3-room bedroom to have a kid and all that. It's slightly going to be very different. And I think that conversation is something that we spoke about as we were kind of like considering as well now.
I think that's really, really important, because this is such a delicate subject, not just sharing to others, to family members and to friends or in public, but also sometimes between the husband and wife. Talking about it, it's like Suet said, it's so raw. And words that are said in a wrong manner can hurt you so much, right? And when both parties are also longing and both are also emotional and also stressed up, it can be quite a trying time in marriage as well. So
actually, like, because like, just Dr. Eeson talking about it for like 10-15 minutes, you realize that there's so much science to it, right? There's so much details. And this is just talking about hormones, not even going into IVF yet, right?
Yeah, not yet, yes.
I remember like in the beginning, obviously the women will always do the research, right? Reading up at night, like, just scrolling in bed. And I remember just being in all these groups, reading about this. That's how I knew about the temperature thing as well. Almost about thermometer, temperature, everything. Because you have to wake up at 6 a.m. every day to like measure your temperature. And people do that and they chart, right? So it can get very stressful for the women especially, because you're the one doing the research. Because your body, I mean, most of the time is the women's body that's like all the hormones and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when that happens, and then you talk to your husband, and he's like, okay, what's the big deal? And usually that's the case because they haven't been doing the research. You can't blame them, right? Like, you have been reading so much into it. So then it's very difficult to communicate, because you feel embarrassed, you feel like you feel all these things, and then all these things, but then he is not making the effort to read about it, or like even want to engage in the conversation. So it can be very difficult in that sense.
So how do you guys eventually really do this together, because in the beginning, probably, like you said, the wife is the one that is doing the more of the research, and then we're the more proactive ones because we feel more and we feel more of like we need to do this soon, right? But usually for the guys, they're quite chill. They're like, it's okay, it's gonna come, don't be so stressed. So at which point did both of you align and tell yourselves, okay, let's do this together and let's really take this seriously and find solutions?
I think it started when we went for the assessment. I think the first year, we were just like doing our best and do all the ovulation kits and stuff like that. But after 1 year, when it wasn't happening, when we did the assessment, that's when we took it seriously, because then it's more scientific, right? We're actually doing tests about it. We're doing blood tests and all these other tests. But then even then, it's not straightforward as well, right? Because after the test doesn't mean that you would diagnose immediately that there's the problem, because it could be like undiagnosed infertility, right? So it's not straightforward at all, like the process. It could be like one small thing that cycle you couldn't detect it, and then you have to wait. So but the assessment was the point where we committed to like, let's find out what's going on. So I would definitely encourage people to do that. Just go for the assessment.
Like Dr. Eeson said, don't be too scared. It's not gonna be like a spider entering into a web and you're stuck there forever, right?
It's like
just go for an assessment.
Just check what's going on.
Yeah, just to have more idea about what's going on internally, and also to have peace of mind, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so more questions back to Dr. Eeson. We'll come back to Suet and Karthik again. So in the topic of like ovulation and period, right? So how would you usually advise your patients to regulate their period? What are some of the ways that we can do that?
Okay, so I mean, again, one of the issues that I wanted to highlight earlier with regards to assessment, I mentioned about coming for assessment, but not being too worried that you get caught and and things escalate out of your own control. But see, for example, if somebody came by for an assessment and you found that the cycles were irregular, and I think in the last 1 week alone, I've come across 3 of them who said they have 3 cycles in a year. I mean, 3 cycles in a year, you can bet your bottom dollar that those are not going to be ovulatory cycles. I don't think that people will, sporadically just 3 times in a year have an egg popping out. It's not going to happen like that, isn't it? So somebody who comes by and says that they have 3 bleeds in a year, you can rest assured 100% that she's had the whole year of non-ovulation. Okay, so essentially what it means to that for the whole year, there's not been any opportunity for that person to conceive. Okay, and that could be the benefit of early assessment, because you suss out the main issues up front and not waste time. Okay, so coming back to the question that you asked about how do you regulate cycles in somebody who is not having regular cycles. Now, a very common mistake is so remember, we're talking about ovulation. So somebody with regular cycles is ovulating. Somebody with irregular cycles is not ovulating. The reverse is you have to ovulate in order to be given in order to have regular cycles. Okay. Some people are given hormone pills, okay, like the family planning pill, to be taken for 21 days, and that gives them regular cycles. Okay. Now, when you're taking the family planning pill, you get regular cycles, but there's no way on earth that you're going to conceive. Okay, because remember, it's a family planning pill. Okay, it's a contraceptive. Okay, so you're never
to keep you from getting pregnant.
Exactly, it was meant to prevent pregnancy. So a regular cycle while you're taking the pill is never going to get you pregnant.
Yeah.
And putting them on the pill for a couple of months and then withdrawing the pill, hoping that the cycles will on its own regulate, is not going to happen either. Okay, it's probably not going to happen. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, if somebody's having irregular cycles, fine, she's not ovulating. What you really have to do is to get her to ovulate. Okay, and how do you do that? You can start off by giving some tablets. Okay, you've got tablets like the most popular is clomiphene, but that's not the only one in the market. And that's the purpose of those tablets, is to get someone to ovulate. What are the things that you can do for yourself to help increase the chances that you ovulate? Okay, I can only think of one, and the most elementary of it is, it's very common for somebody to come and say that, my cycles used to be regular, and then now it's become irregular. Then they'll say that, so when did it become irregular? They say, oh, it used to be regular before I got married, and then now it's become irregular. Okay, so this is a common statement. So then I'll say, yeah, I'm sure your husband caused this because of all the stress at home. Okay, and then she'll say, yeah, but also I think my weight has gone up. Okay, so this is very common, it's very common.
I feel so guilty also.
After that, so getting married is it's a common cause for weight gain. Okay, getting married is a common cause for weight gain. So what happens is weight gain causes, many for cycles to become irregular. So you move from ovulation to slowly move to non-ovulation purely because of weight gain. Okay. So in these people, weight loss, okay, you will definitely see improvement in the cycle regularity. Okay, so if you ask me for one big thing that an individual can do to help increase the chances of ovulation, it's weight loss in somebody who is obviously not who's gained weight. Okay, weight loss, and I think that would probably be the only thing. In terms of food, anything at all that you consume or don't consume that can help you in your weight loss, that would be useful. Okay, it all leads to the same thing, weight loss.
Thank you, Dr. Eeson. I have one question here. Does doing high intensity workouts cause ovulation to not happen? Do you think it's related? Okay,
I don't think that high intensity workouts per se, okay, leads to non-ovulation. Okay, but again, very simple. If the high intensity workout, by doing this high intensity workout, you find that your cycles have become irregular, then there is a relationship. Okay, in other words, you used to have regular cycles, and ever since you've done this high intensity workout, you find that your cycles have become progressively irregular, then obviously there's a connection. But I must tell you that it's highly uncommon. It's usually quite the opposite, because as I said, it's usually the weight gain that makes regular cycles become progressively irregular, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Okay, not the other way around. Interestingly, it's the second time today I've been asked that question. I suppose high intensity workouts are becoming more common.
Yes, it's very popular these days.
So this morning
Yes.
I asked whether she was doing bungee jumping or something. She said no.
Wow. Okay, and another question would be, what would you recommend to do in case of multiple miscarriages? I had a miscarriage at 6 weeks and a second chemical miscarriage. And I think like what Manfong said in the earlier on, right? She said that a lot of her customers are not just new moms, but also moms that face miscarriages as well. So what are some of the advice that you would give for someone like that?
Okay, so recurrent miscarriages. Is definitely it's uncommon. It only affects 1% of women. It's sufficiently uncommon, but very distressing, and requires some attention and some investigation. Okay, so the definition of recurrent miscarriages depends on who you ask. Okay, if you ask the Americans and the Europeans, the definition of recurrent miscarriages is 2 consecutive miscarriages. Okay, so it has to be 2 miscarriages that come together. It can't be a miscarriage, then a live birth in between, and then another miscarriage. Cannot. It has to be 2 consecutive miscarriages, and that's the definition by the Americans and the Europeans. If you ask the British, they will say 3 miscarriages in a row before you call it recurrent miscarriages. The reason for this, and we define it as 2. The reason for this disparity is everything to do with funding. Okay, because if you define it by saying 2 miscarriages, then people will have to come forward earlier, and therefore the implications in terms of cost to the healthcare system is different. Okay, right. So if you have somebody with recurrent miscarriages, there's a number of tests that need to be done. Broadly divided, there are 6. Okay, 6 big causes of recurrent miscarriages: genetics, uterine abnormalities, autoantibodies, you've got infection, you've got hormonal abnormalities, PCO. Okay, PCO is one of the 6, but by far the most common cause of recurrent miscarriages is number 7, which is unknown, idiopathic. Okay, that is the unfortunate, inconvenient truth. Okay, so genetics, autoantibodies, uterine abnormalities, PCO, hormonal abnormalities, infection, and idiopathic. So these are the big causes of recurrent miscarriages. So there are some tests that are done, okay, to try and find out whether this particular patient has one of these causes. But I find that PCO is a relatively common cause of recurrent miscarriages. Okay, PCO is a relatively common cause. We also like to think that genetics is a common cause of recurrent miscarriages, but I always like to caution people that beware, be careful, because there are so many tests that need to be done if you're trying to discover a genetic cause for recurrent miscarriages, and very often they do not yield a result. Okay, so you'll do a lot of tests and none of them are cheap. Okay, none of them are cheap. A whole bunch of tests looking for genetic causes of recurrent miscarriages and probably not find an answer. Okay, so I always put that last. I caution them, and of course the last word on genetics is when you say genetics, they start looking at each other. Okay, not me, not you, but I keep telling them it's neither one of you, because it's been shown over and over again. When you look at genetic causes of miscarriages, the embryo may have genetic problems, but it comes from neither one. It doesn't come from the mother, it doesn't come from the father. The most common source of genetic abnormalities in the embryo is de novo. De novo means happens at that point. So normal egg normal sperm, but they come together and it's abnormal. And then they all look at me and say, but how can that be? How can you have a normal egg and normal sperm, but they come together and it's abnormal? But it's because none of us cook as well as Suet, where you have all the normal ingredients and it comes out perfectly well and it's Instagrammable. Some of us cook, the ingredients are fine, you bake a cake, the egg is fine, the flour is fine, the butter is fine, but the cake is not so fine. So
That's very true.
That is what it is. Okay, so the embryo, although the egg and the sperm is fine, but the embryo comes together and it's not. That's the most common cause. So identifying that is not so straightforward. Okay, but those are the causes. And of course, the last thing that I want to say is about recurrent miscarriages. Interestingly, if you think about it from a mathematical point of view, miscarriages occur 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 of pregnancies across the board. Okay, if you look across the street, somebody is pregnant, there's a 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 chance of a miscarriage, mathematically. Okay, so if there's a 1 in 5 chance of a miscarriage, what are the chances of somebody having a pregnancy and then having a miscarriage and then having another pregnancy and another miscarriage? It should be quite uncommon, right? Okay, mathematically. Now you have somebody with a miscarriage, another pregnancy with a miscarriage, and finally a third pregnancy with a miscarriage. Mathematically, very, very uncommon. But yet, this person is sitting in front of you. Okay? So you ask her a question and say, fine. Now, if you were to conceive for the 4th time, okay, having had 1 miscarriage, another miscarriage, and a third miscarriage, now you get pregnant for the 4th time, what do you think your chances are of having a full-term delivery? I don't know whether Caesar or normal, I don't care as well, but a full-term delivery. Okay? And instantaneously, everybody will tell you that it sounds very remote because of the miscarriage, already statistically an outlier. Now, for the 4th pregnancy, to have a full-term child sounds very remote. So they get very shocked when you tell them that the scientific evidence will tell you that if you've had miscarriage all in a row, and if you had a 4th pregnancy, the chance that that pregnancy will go all the way to term is in excess of 87%. Then
Wow.
the jaw will drop. But that is what the statistics show. Okay. So what does it tell you? Okay, it just tells you that it all come back to the same thing. This is all a trying game. Okay, so you bake your cake, okay, it came out very bad. Try again tomorrow, you bake your cake, still cannot eat. You bake your cake on the 4th time, can makan already lah.
Yeah.
This is scientific. This is not me on a Friday night. This is science.
I think that's really, really interesting to know. And I think that's a very comforting insight as well to a lot of us here. Yeah.
But that is what the data shows very clearly, which is why we get loads of referrals coming in from outside. They get sent to us because they say, oh, this patient had 3 miscarriages. Do IVF with PGS, the pre-implantation genetic testing and all that, because it's definitely genetic and therefore PGS. And I spend a lot of time explaining to them why you shouldn't. And they all wonder, what the hell, man? This guy gets sent here to do PGT and he's telling all this time why I shouldn't do it. It's because of this. Because your chances of getting to the other side of the road is actually very high on its own.
Yeah. Just don't give up. And you.
So we do all the tests and we just push.
Yes. So on the topic of trying, right? So I have a question here. What's the correct definition of trying to conceive? What's the normal frequency of sexual intercourse?
Textbook or KL statistics. Textbook definition is every 3rd day or 2 to 3 times a week. That is the so-called American Society for Reproductive Medicine definition of regular trying, 2 to 3 times a week. But the reality of life is quite different. I mean, look at Friday night, coming back from work at 6 o'clock, traffic jam, by the time we come back, so I think it can be a bit of a hard sell, but there you are. Which is why the ovulation test kit becomes useful.
That is true.
The ovulation test kit becomes useful. Okay, where when you have an app in your phone that tells you roughly when you should be trying, and then an ovulation test kit that tells you, yes, you're ovulating. All that is required is for your handphone to call your husband's handphone and remind him. That's all. But that app haven't been designed yet, lah. So if somebody's designing it, I thought of it first.
Patent the idea.
Reminder.
Wow. Yeah. So there is really no like set like, okay, how many days? It really depends on.
So yeah, so the textbook definition is 2 to 3 times a week. Okay. But if you have an ovulation test positive, our advice is if you test positive today, okay, then you should try today, tomorrow, and the day after. Okay.
Okay.
Today, tomorrow, and the day after.
Mhm.
Why? Okay, because I'll tell you 2 things. Number one, the fertile window is defined as the 6 days that leads to ovulation and ends on the day of ovulation. The 6 days that lead to ovulation, the day of ovulation, and ends on the day of ovulation. That's the definition of the fertile window. Most people would think that you are most fertile on the day of ovulation. So if you draw a U-shaped graph, the peak would be on the day of ovulation. Most people think that, but it's not true. Huh? Not true. Okay, not true. So actually, what the data shows is that the peak ovulation, a peak fertility, is not on the day of ovulation, but it's actually 2 days before ovulation. Okay, so your peak fertile on 2 days before ovulation, and then it starts to drop, and then it drops further until the day of ovulation. Your fertility is already towards the terminal. That means your chances of getting pregnant are already coming to an end. Okay, so it's pretty much the analogy that I normally give. It's pretty much like trying to catch a train. Okay, so if your train leaves at 8 o'clock, you can go to the railway station earlier, 2 hours earlier, 3 hours earlier, 4 hours earlier, no issues. Okay, but do not arrive at the railway station after 8 because the train is gone. Okay, so remember that the egg can only last for 24 hours. Okay, the sperm can last for 5 days. Okay, but the egg can only last for 24 hours. So peak fertility 2 days before ovulation. So if you're trying, you roughly know when ovulation is because you've done the maths, you know your cycle length, you know the 14 days before ovulation occurs, 14 days before the next menses start. So on the calendar, you can roughly pinpoint when ovulation is going to occur. So you can start a couple of days before that and start trying. Or if you're hard pressed for time, use the ovulation test kit. Now, if you're using the ovulation test kit, remember that if you're testing on the day of ovulation, it'll be negative. Why? Because you're looking for something called an LH search, LH hormone search. So when you get an LH search, that is the instruction, the body's instruction for ovulation to happen. Okay, so that LH search will happen 1 day or maybe 1.5 day or maybe half day before ovulation happens. So you will get a positive today, ovulation maybe tomorrow. So when you test tomorrow, the search is gone. So your test will be negative. Okay, so always test about. So if you're using the test kit to test for positive, then always start testing about 2 days or 3 days before your anticipated date of ovulation.
Okay, I think that's really, really very good info, because I think a lot of us, maybe from movies now, you know, it's like, wow, positive on ovulation here. Okay, let's try today, call the husband now, right? But actually there's a window,
the same movie that tells you, the same movie that tells you that when you go into labor, you know, you're shopping, you know, suddenly got pain, oh, my water bag broke, you know, and then the next thing, you know, oh, baby come out, you know, and then by the baby is out before the husband arrives and all that kind of thing. You know, in real life, oh my God, it's so far from the truth, isn't it?
Yes.
There you are sitting in the labor ward for 3 days. Wondering how come it was different in the movies.
Yes, so many things are different from the movies. So on the topic of like sperm, right, let's move on to like IVF related topics, right?
Sure.
So there's a question for you. Is there treatment for low sperm count?
Absolutely. I mean, okay, so the issue is when there are issues with sperm, fertilization won't happen. Okay, so for some interesting mystery of the universe, it requires more than one sperm to get the job done. Okay. In fact, it requires a couple of million sperm to get the job done. Okay. So that is the reality. So when there are issues with sperm, fertilization won't happen. Okay. So you will not get your embryo and therefore the pregnancy won't happen. It's been shown very clearly, okay, even from the very beginning, you know, when IVF was first discovered, that when you actually try to fertilize an egg with sperm in the lab, where there are issues with the sperm, fertilization will not happen. Okay, fertilization will not happen. So, so as you know, first IVF baby is what, 42 years. It's 44 this year, because the first IVF baby was in 1978. Okay, in 1978. So the first IVF baby is 44 years old today. Okay, in July 25th. So at the beginning, when you try to fertilize an egg, you put an egg into a petri dish and you mix with some sperm. And if there were issues with those sperm, nothing will happen. You come back tomorrow, you find that fertilization has not happened. Okay, it took them 15 years to get to the next step, because at that point in time, if there were sperm issues, that's it, like you're stuck. Okay, no baby, because you'll never get fertilization. And it took them 15 years to move to the next level, because in 1993, okay, so 78 was the first IVF baby. It was only in 1993 when they discovered ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. You could actually identify one sperm under the microscope and inject that into the egg and then get fertilization. So that was a big move, okay, from conventional IVF to ICSI. So now, if you had severe sperm problems, even if you had a count of 1 million, even if there was no sperm, and you actually had to go and do a testicular biopsy, which we do quite often, to find sperm and inject that sperm into the egg, you could still get a pregnancy because of being able to inject the sperm. Okay.
So what are some of the ways that, like, you know, at home I can encourage my husband to do, you know, to increase his sperm count or the quality of his sperm?
Okay. Yeah. So the number of so prior to embarking on any of this, so there's a couple of things that we should be doing to optimize sperm first. Okay. So so the common things would be the common culprits: alcohol. Okay. High alcohol consumption. Okay, especially the so-called binge drinking. Okay, so having 2 drinks 2 times a week is fine. So no one's asking, you know, you to be a complete teetotaler. So 2 drinks 2 times a week is fine. But the problem starts when you don't have anything, and then on a Saturday night, you know, it's time to compensate for that dry week, you know. So then, you know, then you have the binge of alcohol, and that binge of alcohol causes a lot of damage to the sperm. Okay, so it's not uncommon for someone to come and tell you that you ask them, so I only drink on weekends. First they say, I only occasional drinker. So how often are these occasions? Oh, once a week. And how much? Not much. And how much is not much? Oh, only half a bottle of whiskey. Only half a bottle of whiskey. It's amazing, you know, what a Saturday night can do.
It's a revenge day.
Yes. So that causes a lot of damage to the sperm. And don't forget, it takes up to 3 months for that sperm to regenerate, because sperm production is not an overnight thing. You don't have, you know, a sperm that's immature today and then mature tomorrow. No, the maturation process of immature sperm to a mature sperm takes 3 months. So if you damage your stock on tonight, okay, it's going to be 3 months before you see replenishment of that stock. Okay, so that is so alcohol is number 1. There is some negative effect of smoking. Okay, but smoking is far more a problem for women than it is for men. Okay. Alcohol is far bigger a problem for men than it is for women.
All right.
Okay, but anyway, alcohol, smoking. So those are the big things. Then supplements. Okay, so supplements are also important. I think all the other things are subsidiary. Okay,
supplements. What are some of the supplements that we should be thinking?
Okay, so they are so supplements are supplements. Basically, you know, supplements are stuff that, you know, all this, you know, so-called minerals and this, you know, other bits that are supposedly good for good in or utilized in sperm production. Okay, So there are a couple of brands out there, each one saying that, they're better than the other. And I think that in all fairness, if you look at the science of it, they're all probably quite equal. They're quite equal. I can give you examples of brands out there like Profertil, Trebistan, Bioselenium, Sperman, Edizoa, and then, all these years, everyone and anyone who's been to Australia will tell you about Elevate, and more Elevate. So now there's a Manovit, not surprising. Okay, so I mean, I really can't tell you whether one is better than the other, but there you go. I think something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
And personally, I find that if you've got severe, very poor sperm counts, and sometimes clomid is also quite, clomiphene is also quite useful to try and drive the testes to be a bit more hardworking.
Wow.
Yeah. But as far as what you can do for yourself at home, it's only supplements, smoking, alcohol.
Does stress affect low sperm count as well?
Favorite question. I think stress can affect a lot of things in our lives. But the only problem is that how do we prove it? Because you cannot quantify stress.
It's true.
So, we cannot quantify. So I'm very, very sure that stress is to be blamed for a lot of things going on in our lives. But the only problem is you can't prove it because you can't do clinical studies. You can't do clinical studies because you can't quantify it. So the only evidence out there that alludes to stress causing disease comes from animal studies, where you confine animals and you stress them and you do all kinds of weird experiments on animals. And that's where most of this evidence comes from, and also from Second World War.
Yeah. Okay. Now, more on the IVF questions. So is it advisable to opt for IVF if my AMH level is 0.33 and I'm 36 years old currently?
So the problem with the low AMH is that your egg reserve or egg counts are very low. So what will happen then is that it will take a lot of effort to coax eggs out from the ovary. So you can still do, okay, but your yield will be very low, okay? So for example, I mean, fertility as a whole is a numbers game, bottom line. See, the most fertile couple trying on the most fertile day of the month, okay, you ask them, what are the chances of the most fertile couple trying on the most fertile day of the month to conceive? And say 100%. Huh? 100%? You gotta be kidding, man. You think it's a cat, is it? So the most fertile couple trying on the most fertile day has only a 30% chance of conceiving. So even they have to try cycle after cycle after cycle. Okay, so it's a trying game. Similarly with IVF, the more eggs you have, the more embryos you have. The more embryos you have, the better chance you have to conceive. Why? Because not every embryo can give you a baby. Humans produce embryos, but most often the embryos that humans produce are genetically useless. Useless, why? It gives you nothing. You put it back, it gives you nothing. Okay? This is a known fact. Okay? So it is the minority of embryos that we produce that are genetically normal and can therefore give you a pregnancy. So therefore, the more eggs we have, the more embryos we have, the more embryos you have, the better, the higher the chance that we will have normal embryos to give us that pregnancy.
Okay.
So coming back to this situation where the AMH is low, you do a full cycle of IVF, but how many eggs are we going to collect? How many embryos are we going to have? And finally, how many of those embryos are going to be genetically normal to give us a pregnancy? So automatically when the AMH is low, because the yield will be low, your chances of pregnancy falls. In contrast to somebody of the same age, but with the normal AMH, who will produce far more eggs. Okay, so that is comparison. So the common question then will be, how can I compensate for this low AMH? So, okay, fine, I do one IVF cycle, I only get 2 eggs, whereas you do an IVF cycle and get 10 eggs. So how can I be like you? How can I get 10 eggs? The only way is accumulate. So that means multiple cycles. Do one cycle, you get eggs, you make embryos, you do another cycle. So that's, so that's logistically and also, from a dollar and cents point of view, it's very taxing, but that is the only way, okay, to compensate for a low reserve.
Okay.
But fortunately, they're young. She's young, so therefore, we hope the egg quality will be okay.
Okay, that's good. And another question on AMH as well. My AMH levels are normal and I'm currently going through IVF treatment. However, my follicles were not responding well on medication given. I was given letrozole, folliculin, humo, and cetrotide. My eggs were small and not matured. Do my eggs still have a chance if I change to other protocol on next IVF?
Okay. So AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, is a blood test that tells you your ovarian reserve. So basically, it's your ovarian egg bank account. Okay, it tells you how many eggs you have left in your ovary. And there is a very clear relationship between your AMH and your response to stimulation. High AMH, good response, many eggs. Low AMH, more difficult to stimulate and less eggs to be retrieved. But there is a distinct group of people that have a good AMH, but poor response. Okay, there is definitely a group out there with a good AMH, but a poor response. And we think that, we say that these people have what you call a receptor insensitivity. What it means is that the eggs are unable to respond to the stimulation. So you give them the injections to get the eggs to respond, but they cannot respond because the receptors in the follicles are unable to see that stimulation coming. It's just like diabetics, you know, diabetic, the majority of older diabetics, not the kids with diabetes, but the older people with diabetes have what is called insulin resistant diabetes. They got lots of insulin, but the insulin is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Why? Because there's a receptor insensitivity. The cells in the body cannot see the insulin, and therefore the insulin cannot do its job. Same thing here. You give them a lot of FSH to stimulate the follicles, but the follicles cannot grow. Okay, so there is, in fact, in some countries in the world, Germany being one of them, they actually do, because this is genetic, it appears to be a genetic inheritance, this receptor insensitivity. So in Germany, they actually screen their patients beforehand for receptor insensitivity to identify those people who will potentially have this problem of not responding, and preferentially start them off with a very high dose, knowing that they're going to run into these issues. But we don't have the test available in this country yet. So unfortunately, we'll just have to learn as we move. You know, so you'll get somebody that you give a reasonable dose and they don't respond, and you go like, uh-oh. Receptor. So would they probably respond differently to a different protocol? Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll just have to push harder with a higher dose and collect and accumulate.
Okay, thank you, doctor. I also have another question here, actually 2 questions about endo. So my doctor does not recommend me doing IVF now due to endo as low success rate. I did surgery 2 years ago due to endo and not keen for another surgery. What can I do? And also I have another question here as well. I have endo with left fallopian tube blocked with hydro. Do I need to remove the fallopian tube before starting IVF? Low AMH as well.
Yeah. So the first question was about somebody with endometriosis and had surgery twice and being discouraged from trying. So I'm guessing that's because AMH is low. Okay. So so one of the problems with endometriosis is that when they have endometriosis, they have cysts, and the cysts inevitably they end up with surgery. If they're not careful, they'll end up with surgery more than once. So what happens is when you do surgery to remove an endometriotic cyst, no matter what you do, you will still remove a little bit of normal ovarian tissue. So inevitably, one surgery, yes, you remove the cyst, and then you remove a little bit of normal ovarian tissue, so you find your egg numbers will fall. God forbid you end up in another surgery to remove a recurring cyst. You have more ovarian tissue removed, more normal eggs removed, and finally you find that your egg reserve becomes very, very low. And this sounds about the situation here, okay, where somebody's been discouraged from trying because the egg numbers are very low, okay. Unfortunately, this can happen if you're not careful. This can happen. If you've never tried IVF, then I would encourage you to try, because getting 1 or 2 eggs, which can potentially become an embryo, is still better than not doing anything at all. But be prepared that you may need to accumulate. If you've done IVF before and you didn't get an embryo that was reasonable enough to transfer, or if you've done IVF more than once and you did not get embryos for transfer, then unfortunately your only option may be egg donation. Okay, that may be the only option. So it all depends on whether you've tried or not. The second part of the question was about endometriosis with the hydrosulfings. So this is interesting. When you have a hydrosulfings, the swollen tube generally contains fluid, because remember, the cells of the tube release fluid, and this fluid normally comes out from the femoral end, but here it can't come out because the femoral end is blocked. Okay, and that's why you get a hydrosulfings. You get a swollen tube because of fluid accumulation within the tube. The problem with IVF is when you have a swollen tube, that fluid needs to flow somewhere, so it tends to backflow. Okay, so it flows backward into the cavity of the womb. So when you do IVF, you got eggs, sperm, and then now you have an embryo, and you want to put the embryo back into the cavity. But there is fluid coming from the tube into the cavity, and this fluid is toxic to the embryo. So you find that in somebody with the hydrosulfings doing IVF, and you find the implantation rates are lower. So you will have to consider going and either removing the tube or clipping the tube or ligating the tube. You may have no choice.
Thank you, doctor. Okay, I'll give doctor a break after answering so many questions. Now back to Suet, Liew, and Karthik. So I have a question here for you guys. How do you emotionally prepare for the IVF journey? And what are the factors you've considered before going for IVF?
Yeah. Even though it's only like 3 years ago, but everything is like a blur now after you go through like everything. Then, so doctor talking about this entire process reminds me of what actually happened to us. Because after a while, like, you know, you're just doing so many things and you just forget. But we also started with that. I started with PCOS, and then I did the whole clomid thing for a year. It didn't work out. And then I found out I have a hydro, which is a swollen tube, and then wanted to go remove it, and found out actually it's fine. So I removed the cyst instead. And then after all that, eventually we decided that, I mean, we could still investigate more and we could still go down, you know, the long road of testing and trying and testing and trying. But we decided then, actually it was the first time we saw Dr. Eeson. We were seeing other doctors before. Went to Dr. Eeson, he spent an hour with me, which is very rare, by the way, with specialists. It's very rare that a doctor will sit down with you for an hour, like what he's doing now, giving advice and talking about Germany and jokes, and it's very rare. So when he did that, and then, you know, he didn't pressure us at all, and we realized that, you know what, it's been 2.5 years at that point. We decided that, you know, we're just gonna give IVF a try. And how do we emotionally prepare? I think it's a journey, right? Like, you don't start and then immediately think about IVF. You start and then you slowly, okay, let's try this first, let's try that first, and then slowly just come to terms with it. So we discussed a lot as a couple as well, like, okay, should we try this first, and read up a bit more, and then encourage him to also find out more, and then he read a lot after that. And that's how we slowly came to grasp with it. So it's not an overnight, like, okay, you know, I'm infertile, therefore I just have to come to terms with it overnight. But it was definitely a journey of investigating and then talking about it and then coming to terms with it. Do you want to add anything else?
No, I think yeah.
He read a lot. He read some books. Yeah, because that's how he processed things. I guess it depends on how you process things as well. You can journal, you can talk to people.
Yeah. So I actually have a question for Karthik as well, like directed to Karthik. We had 2 failed IVF transfers. My wife's mood swing is very bad and she would cry and feel depressed while I could only comfort her. What do you do to help Suet Liew feel better throughout the journey?
Actually, this is a tough one. I guess the you know, hearing the question, the first thing that comes to mind is you would want to do anything and everything to make it easier, but you want to do it in a way that is respectful and validates her feelings as well, right? Because it's actually like when Suet was going through it, the whole time I was just thinking, what can I do to just be helpful in whatever form? So I remember that time when she had that like the session with Dr. Eeson, she called me, and I was actually in KK at that time, in Sabah, And I could sense in her, like just her voice and tone, that she was really, really excited, that, you know, she felt like, you know, this feels right and she wants to just commit. And at that point, it was very different. Like we have seen other doctors and it wasn't the same. And there was probably like that chemistry, like, you know, this doctor understands, she feel very comfortable. And then she said, you know, should we make the decision? And I said, yes, let's commit, let's do it. And then because I was there, and then she actually traveled and came over for that weekend. And at that weekend, she was already starting to, like, you know, put all those like injections and stuff, right? And the whole time I was just telling myself, like, you know, this is, I guess, like, ultimately it is a journey, and it's a journey of also becoming better as a person. And I was trying to challenge myself to be that, right? So even though I was afraid of needles and afraid of like blood, I was telling myself, you know, this is, you know, moments of like a test that I probably have to do something like. And I think just that mindset was what got me in you know, really invested in trying to read as much as possible. So I remember even as she was getting the transfer, and I was waiting outside, I was trying to speed read this one particular book on IVF, so that when she comes out, I would have a little bit more information, so that will be a bit more helpful in whatever field, right? And I think that's been the theme, and it kind of like translated even in parenting, that, you know, every single time, because one thing is that Suet reads a lot, and she reads not just the stuff that's on, like, you know, articles, but also Reddit threads. So all these, like, you know, other parents were going through. So, you know, all this, like, I remember there was one point we were discussing, and she was telling me about like the success rate. You know, she researched the success rate of IVF to the T, right? And I was like, okay, you know, it's easy for me to feel like, oh, yo, just let it go, lah. Like, you know, just chill. You know, we just have to go through it. It's easy for me to do that, but I know from the early onset, when I was that, it was not being helpful. So what would be more helpful is, like, you know, if she's actually feeling that, then there is a concern, and trying to just like let her process it, and trying to be there, and then get informed, and try to read, and then try to then have a conversation, because I think that's what Suet needed most, right? It's a two-way conversation. It's not one that says that, hey, you know, don't worry. Like, I think that's super invalidating, and I think that drives her up even more. And if that's one key takeaway, is to learn as much together, and then have a conversation, so that the tantrums is not just a symptom, but it's actually just trying to communicate something. And maybe that is like an opportunity to have a conversation. That's how I processed it. I don't know if you agree.
So, okay, maybe I ask Suet now, now that you recall back on your journey, what are some of the things that stood out that Karthik did that made you feel like, wow, he's really with me on this, and we are really in this together, and I don't feel so alone? Because I have another question here, right? My husband is so afraid of people knowing that we go for IVF. It makes me feel like I'm alone in this journey and I couldn't talk to anyone. What would you advise? So I believe there are a lot of women, you know, out there who are feeling very lonely, because it's such a private matter, and not everyone is comfortable discussing it or telling it to family members and friends, because they may not even offer the right support, right? So as a couple, you know, you have each other before you tell it to the world, like, or maybe your gynae, that's it, three of you, right? So what are some of the things, or what were some of the things that Karthik did that stood out in this whole process?
And this is such a common feeling, right? On my IVF account as well, like 90% of them are women who follow my IVF account. But actually, you know, going through IVF and this whole process is not just the women actually who, you know, should be investigated and should be part of the journey, right? But so many women are the ones who approach me to talk about it. And I wonder if it's just because not, you know, I don't know, like it's not something that men talk about often, or it's openly sharing. But I think, like starting from his first story of like committing, I think just knowing that it's two of us together producing this baby, not just me who wants the baby, both of us want the baby together, right? I think also that I've had people talking to me and realizing that actually it's just a woman who wants the baby, then it's very difficult also. You just have to really be honest, like, okay, why are we going on this journey? Do we want to do it together? What's the goal? How long should, you know, all this communication, which is actually very hard. It's easy to talk about to communicate, but when you get down to it, it's actually quite difficult to have that conversation. But for us, it's really like, I mean, of course there are bad days as well where we're not talking to each other, and I was like so angry at him. But generally, like we have a consensus lah. We have a consensus that this is something that we are doing together. This is not just my journey and my problem and something that I want and long for, but it's something that we want. I think coming to terms with that first before anything else is quite important. Because if you don't have that, then you can get down this very lonely path, right? And then you always feel like he doesn't understand. But yeah, couples therapy maybe would help as well.
No,
you
but
know.
what was the specific thing that I did?
You did.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
you
not
want to hear?
Not tailored to-
Yeah, probably because like, you know how guys work, right? They need like very specific guide sometimes. Like if you tell them, yeah, just be supportive, like what should I do, right? So maybe some actions or some words that he said that really made you feel very supported.
Yeah. I think just like, first of all, listening to the concern that I have, like, let's say I research things. I don't want to just sit with the information alone. Like in the beginning, he wasn't really sure, but after a while, then he realized that, okay, he should be listening to the information that I'm sharing with him. So he was quite open with it to listen and to learn from it.
To listen and to be open to know more as well.
Instead of
show
just
interest.
Instead of just jumping in and trying to fix the problem, right? Like, which is common relationship advice. Yeah, just listening to like what's on my mind, like what have I been reading and why am I so worked up about it? Why am I so anxious about it? And just listening to it. And then he has his own ways of doing research as well. Then when I realized that actually he has been reading as well, that's when I felt like, oh, actually he's not, he's not just letting me do all the research on my own. I saw that, he's been reading as well. He doesn't talk about it as much as I do or feel as anxious about it as I do. But just me knowing that he did do a bit of research made me feel really comforted as well. And commitment. I think the commitment part is the most important. I know that he wants to go on this journey with me together and want this baby together with me. That was really important. That's really good.
I think by you guys sharing, a lot of couples here are already like, okay, I know what to expect. And if like, let's say they're already halfway through the journey, okay, I know what to learn from. So thank you so much for sharing so openly. I have a few more questions for Doctor, and then we'll call it a night because I know it's a Friday night, right? And it's been a long week. So yeah. Is it possible to get pregnant through embryo transfer even though there's a cyst, Doctor?
So I'm guessing that you're talking about an endometriotic cyst, okay? But even if you're not, yes, as long as the cyst that we are talking about is not active from a hormonal point of view, because some cysts can be releasing hormones. So if you have a cyst that's releasing hormones, then that's bad news. But if it's a cyst that isn't doing that, for example, an endometriotic cyst, then yes, you can conceive despite the cyst being there. You don't have to go and do some surgery to remove that cyst before you do an embryo transfer.
Okay. And one more question. Few rounds of unsuccessful clomid cycles before doing IVF last year. 0 fertilization out of 11 oocytes retrieved. This huge blow made us hesitate to proceed as we are fearful the same thing might happen again.
Sure.
Are there any technology that might improve poor fertilization rate if we were to go for IVF again?
Sure. So, I mean, now getting a 0 FERT from 11 oocytes is definitely not the norm. In fact, I would think that this it's exceptionally uncommon to get a 0 FERT. But yes, it does happen. Okay, yes, it does happen. I mean, we do a fair number, perhaps a bit more than 1,000 a year, and you probably get this maybe in 3 cases in a year. Okay, and that's probably how uncommon it is. There are certain lab techniques that are available that can be utilized to try and circumvent this or to avoid this. So yes, you may not always be successful, okay, but you can. There are mechanisms available. There are lab techniques available that can at least attempt to overcome this. So it's not a once it happens and it's always going to happen forever and ever. No, not necessarily the case.
Okay. Okay. One more question. I have blood test done and the TSH is 4.85 and normal T4. Does this affect my fertility? What further step I need to do before trying timely sexual intercourse or IUI? Thank you.
Okay, so thyroid function is important for thyroid function and ovulation are closely related. So if you have hypothyroidism, which means your thyroid levels are very low, or if you have hyperthyroidism, which means your thyroid levels are very high, in both these circumstances, you can have non-ovulatory cycles. So both sides of the divide can have issues with ovulation. Hypothyroidism, which is a reduced thyroid function, is more common a cause for non-ovulation than hyper. Okay, so it's more common to see a hypothyroid than a hyperthyroid. Okay, so now if you have a TSH which is 4 point something, which is quite in normal range, and a free T3 or free T4 levels which are normal, then from a biochemical point of view, you are euthyroid, which means that you are normal. Okay, your thyroid function is normal. So under these circumstances, you would expect the person to be ovulating. Okay, if she is not ovulating, then it's not due to the thyroid dysfunction. Okay, because her thyroid function is normal. The TSH is within the normal range, but if you have somebody with recurrent implantation failure or recurrent miscarriages, that level of TSH being 4 point something would be regarded as being abnormal. Okay, so this is a fun fact. Okay, not so fun, it's a serious fact. Okay? For recurrent miscarriages, the TSH above 2.5 is considered to be an issue. Okay, although it's still in the normal range, but a TSH of more than 2.5 is considered, it's called a subclinical hypothyroidism. Okay, so we would still treat with thyroxine to bring it under 2.5. Okay, but for somebody who's just trying on their own and having regular cycles, just go for it. Don't worry about it.
All right, thank you, doctor. I have 2 more questions and then we'll call you a night, right? So I am 5 weeks pregnant and doctor also found a 5 cm fibroid in my uterus. Anything I should be aware of?
Don't worry, be happy.
Yes.
I know it's very often people come. I mean, we've had this a number of times. Somebody pregnant and then by the way went for a scan and found a fibroid, and then everyone gets excited. Oh, you have a fibroid. This fibroid can cause miscarriages. This fibroid can cause infertility. This fibroid can cause pain. But she's pregnant, so leave it alone. Just watch. Okay,
yeah.
Most of the time, nothing will happen. Okay,
yeah.
No matter how big the fibroid, nothing will happen. I think absolutely nothing justifies interference under these circumstances.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes they present with a big fibroid and they haven't even been trying. Okay, they go for a medical checkup and then they say, oh, you got a fibroid. And then they present and say, I've got a fibroid. How did you find it? Because I went for a medical examination, they found a fibroid. And I've been told that this fibroid can cause infertility, can cause recurrent miscarriages, can cause all kinds of things under the sun. And therefore, do I need to remove this? And I think that you really have to be very, very careful. Okay, because you haven't tried anything, it doesn't cause any problems. You've never tried to get pregnant, might even be a single person. And my thoughts are generally leave it alone.
Yeah. Okay. One last question on IVF. What are the chances of first try IVF? Statistically.
If you have somebody who's 35 years and younger, and if you transfer a single blastocyst, and a blastocyst is a day 5 or day 6 embryo. So you stimulate the ovaries, you get the follicles to grow, and then you retrieve the eggs, you get sperm, you inseminate or you inject. Basically, you fertilize the eggs, and then you get an embryo, and then you culture that embryo for 5 or 6 days, and you get an embryo that's called a blastocyst. If you transfer one blastocyst into somebody who's 35 years and younger, there's a 50% chance of a pregnancy, 50 to 60% chance of a pregnancy.
And 35 and older?
If you're between 35 and 40, then your chances will, the statistics will show that the probability of pregnancy drops a little bit. It's probably about 40%. If you're above the age of 40 and you're transferring a single blastocyst, then you're probably looking at about a 25 to 30% max.
Mm-hmm. What is the maximum age that one can go for IVF?
That's an exceptionally interesting question. I actually gave a lecture last week. It's still available, I think, online. on am I too old to get pregnant? It's actually a big eye-opener. It's a huge eye-opener. Do you know that the world record of the oldest person to conceive after IVF is at the age of 50? It was a lady, there was actually a publication in a reputable journal by a doctor in India who claimed that her patient was 50 when she actually had an IVF pregnancy. But for those who don't accept that as being the truth, then the oldest will be 48. But they're very, very few. They're very, very few. So statistically, okay, if I'm asked this question, up to the age, between the age of 41 to 45, 1/3 of this group of women between the age of 41 to 45 trying IVF, 1/3 of them will conceive in up to 6 cycles of IVF. So in other words, if you put this cohort of 41 to 45 through 6 cycles of IVF, 1/3 of them will conceive. But whether you can afford 6 cycles or not, different question. Okay. But if you put them through 6 cycles of IVF, 1/3 of them will conceive. So that tells us that, hey, you know what? There is a fighting chance between 41 to 45. After 45, the numbers are very few. Okay. Close to 1%. Close to 1%. So if somebody above the age of 45 comes and says, you want to try IVF, you can tell them, by all means, if you want to try IVF, go for it, but beware. Your chances of a live birth is close to 1%. That's usually the turn-off.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing all your insights. I really feel like, wow, this is something you pay for to listen to, right, guys? So
if I could just say one thing about Shirley, in all credit to you guys, I mean, I think she was very focused. Okay, she was very focused. She was very clear about directions that she wanted to take. Okay, I mean, both of them anyway, were very clear about directions that they wanted to take, and it's not easy to rattle her as well. She doesn't. Some people are very, they get rattled very easily. Oh, this or that. But these two know. And I think the reason for that is also very clear. If it's abundant, it's very, very clear from what they've told us that because they read a lot, okay, and they're very well informed. And when you're very well informed, your foundation very strong. You know what the basis, the basics are. You know how things are and how things move along. And because your foundation is very strong, you don't listen easily to, and the wind blows, so you won't easily, and I think that helps a lot.
Yeah.
It helps with the focusing. Whereas in some people, maybe because they don't read much, and therefore they don't know much, and therefore, you'll go and read internet, some blog site, somebody said this, and then, rattles you,
Yeah.
So that is to their credit, and that's why they've done phenomenally well.
Yeah. That's great to know. So, Dr. Eeson, what are some of the words that you want to say? Any last words to say to our audience here?
I don't think
who are trying already, in the whole process, or are thinking of trying for IVF.
I think that the vast majority of us. Okay, first of all, if you think there's an issue, so be it, I can think of 1,000 things worse. Okay, cancer. Okay, which is 1,000 times worse. Okay, than having a slight delay and getting pregnant. Okay, so if there's a slight delay, so what? Okay, if it requires to be assessed, so what? What's the big deal? Okay, if they need a bit of assistance, so what? I mean, there's so many other more important things in life. We need to move on, there's work, there's family, there's parents, there's so many other things that need to be sorted out. We can't just be, focused on this slight delay and, keep, focusing on why hasn't it happened, why isn't it happened, why is it my fault, your fault? Just get on with it, just get on with it and move on. So that's one. The vast majority of us can be helped. Okay, it's only the small minority that may have strange and unusual issues, but the vast majority play the same game, they play by the same rules, which is it's a numbers game. Okay, it's just that some of us are advantaged and some of us are a bit disadvantaged. That's all in terms, but they play the same game, which is the numbers game. Okay, And the earlier we get on with it, the better off we are, because, you know, the time age comes in, another disadvantage comes in, you know, so the earlier we get on with it, the better. That's it. No big deal.
Yes. And anytime, you know, like what doctor says, just go for an assessment. That no harm. Yeah, just find out, and then you can plan your course of action instead of like just reading what Google says and what blogs say, forums say, right? It's a never-ending cycle. It's down a rabbit hole. So just talk to a professional, talk to a doctor that you trust. How about Suet and Karthik? Do you have anything that you want to say to all the audience over here?
Yeah. I don't want to trivialize the hardship, right? Because it can be, for us, we were successful in the first cycle. We're very, very, very blessed with that. People who have gone through many, many other cycles as well. So I don't want to trivialize the hardship, but I also want to say that the fact that we didn't get pregnant immediately, like, got us to reflect on a lot of things. Why do we want a child in the first place? You know, what do we want from our relationship? If we don't have a child, what's going to happen? I mean, these things strengthen your marriage and strengthens who you are as well as a person. So, I mean, yeah, the positive side of it is like we are a lot more deliberate about what we want. Now that we have a child, we're a lot more deliberate about raising her, because it took a while, right? So those are positive things that came out of it. So yeah, I mean, if that doesn't work out, there are other things that, you know, we can focus on as well. So those are all good things and great things that can come for your life as well. So it's not the be it and all. I mean, I can say that now because we have a child, but at the same time, like, I just want to encourage people to think that way as well. Don't know if anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree to your wisdom. That's just one thing. I think the journey also led us to, like, sometimes when it gets emotional, the best way to counter emotions is actually to rely on science. And I think that's why assessment and doctor like advice and that was actually very critical. So at least we know that sometimes we can have emotions and opinion, but if science is there to say that don't worry, then it makes it a lot easier. So we are not debating opinions, but we are actually just, hey, science, we can rely on that. So that's another thing that I felt like throughout the journey, not just for IVF, but also at parenting, there is a lot of things that we can kind of like look at evidence-based decision making. That is all, but your wisdom stands true.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eeson and Suet, Karthik, and also Manfong for initiating this very, very meaningful conversation today. I think personally, I learned a lot. And also I learned about how to talk to people who are going through it as well. Like maybe some of you here, you're here on behalf of a friend or a sibling, right? Maybe they are unable to attend, or they are very shy to attend. So whatever you learned here, you can also share with them. So thank you so much once again, Dr. Eeson,
thank you so much.
Karthik. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Please have a good evening. Everyone have a great weekend. Thank you for making time. I hope you enjoyed the session today.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.